Hello, I'm Martijn Graat and this is Does Logistics Matter? A podcast on trends and innovations in supply chain and logistics. Answering yes again to the question today is Johan Elzes, Business Unit Director and Russia Advisor at Ahlers. On this episode, we talk about how you can make sure your mission-critical logistics will not become a mission impossible, especially in countries with a challenging logistics environment like Russia and CIS. Please enjoy my conversation with Johan Elzes. Johan, welcome back to the show. I always start each episode with asking my guests the same question. Does logistics matter? A question you obviously answered already. Is your answer still the same?
Well, you know that I want to be provocative and I know that you want me to be provocative, but unfortunately, logistics does still matter. So I cannot disappoint you.
Yeah. It's I'm glad it does. When you were last guest, it was episode 8. We spoke about how European and American companies can do business in Russia, as there are a lot of obstacles for them to overcome. So people interested in that should definitely check out episode 8. This time we are going to speak about the impact that logistics has on delivering service to business customers. What can you tell me about that?
Well, firstly, I want to explain or just say a few words. What are we talking about actually, right? So internally we have the name after sales services. So everything that comes after the sales, but that's like a really big part of the business. For example, if you order something on bol.com or any e-commerce player and you send it back, that's also after sales services. But that is something that Ahlers doesn't do. What we actually do is more on the mission critical side, more on the service logistics side, where companies need after sales services, after sales logistics to keep their business running, to keep their customers happy. That is basically what we're talking about.
So this is both maintenance as well as when there's a disruption in service or when something breaks down?
Yeah, exactly. So you can imagine, for example, that if you have capital equipment, if you have big machinery running, that you need spare parts. If the machinery isn't running, then it costs money. If you sold something to your customer that is using your equipment, then your customer is asking, okay, can you give me the guarantee that within a certain amount of time, can be 8 hours, can be even 4 hours, can be 24 hours, that you can provide a spare part so that, you know, the equipment that I buy from you will actually be working all the time. Because if you cannot guarantee that, then with all due respect, I might go to your competitor who can guarantee it. So the service logistics is really something that for some companies is a competitive edge. And obviously, those companies need a partner in the region where their customer is active who can support them with that. So it's service logistics or mission critical logistics. Does not have to be machinery, can be electronics, but everything that when something breaks down, it generates huge amounts of costs.
I know that you are specifically active in Russia, which is a vast country. How does that impact the way in which the mission critical logistics you are talking about works?
Well, obviously, Russia has its logistic challenges. Firstly, it's a big country; it's a huge country. And secondly, the infrastructure isn't as well developed as we have in Western Europe. So, firstly, you need to get actually to the place. The place might be 1,000, 2,000 kilometers from where you have the parts located. And then, you know, you first have to get there using the roads that are there. It's not so easy. Sometimes there aren't even roads or only dirt roads. And that is after you've already imported the goods into Russia, which, as we've talked about last time, is a challenge in itself.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can imagine. Um, so, can you do you have an example of a customer that you service and that uses this mission critical logistics?
Well, one of my customers is IMEX, for example. I think all the people who are listening to this podcast will know IMEX as a company. Company provides projectors to cinema chains, etc. Um, so that's one of my customers in Russia. IMEX provides projectors, but also all the equipment that is needed to keep the cinemas running to cinema chains. Um,
Hmm.
so imagine you have 10 to 15 cinemas running on a server, on software, and the server breaks down. Then that's a huge cost for the cinema chain. So as IMAX, providing service and providing warranty to the cinema chain, they are responsible for having a replacement part nearby. So IMAX, being a Canadian company, needs to have a stock of local spare parts in Russia, already custom cleared and ready to be shipped out within 4 or 8 hours to be delivered to a cinema chain. And we actually had such a case that I'm describing now, that the main server of the cinema chain went down, and IMAX was responsible to get a replacement there. We had it on stock, so luckily we were able to replace it in time, so that within a few hours the cinema was ready to go again. And I can describe a number of examples of such cases, but what we see is that European companies, American companies, Canadian companies in this example, I mean, Russia is interesting for business. There's a lot of business to do here. But if your product relies on service and is mission critical for your customers, then you need to be able to provide that service. You need to be able to provide spare parts. You need to be able to provide replacements. And you cannot say to your customers, buy my capital equipment, invest a few million euros. And if you need a replacement, then yeah, well, with all due respect, you need to wait a few days or even a week. I mean, then your business development in Russia will just not come off the ground. So it's not about providing the service as such. It is really, going back to your strategic vision on how to develop business in Russia and what do you need for that. If you cannot provide service, in the example of IMEX, then you really cannot develop your business in Russia. So it's all about understanding as a company what you need to be able to develop your business in Russia, and then finding a way to have it in place.
Yeah, well, you say IMAX, then immediately you're talking mission critical, and I'm immediately thinking about Mission Impossible. I just can't help it. So what you're actually saying is that if you don't have your service logistics or your mission critical logistics in place, you actually have a Mission Impossible, and the parts will not get to the place where you want it.
So Mission Impossible is quite a good example, actually. Imagine that you are supplying capital equipment to an oil refinery or to a gas refinery. You have quite a few of those in Russia. And imagine that if the oil refinery isn't working because some of your capital equipment broke down, that costs a huge amount of money. So if you cannot guarantee to the company of that oil refinery that you have spare parts in place, that you can provide service, then, well, simply they will not buy from you. That's also an advantage, because if you can provide this service, then you have an advantage compared to your competitors. Coming back to the Mission Impossible part, the mission critical part, refineries are usually not in the most easy to reach regions or easy to reach places. And it can very well be in Russia that we need to charter a helicopter to get the part really at the location. It's not that without a helicopter you can't get there. It'll take you a few days. And yes, a helicopter will cost a huge amount of money, but it'll cost even more money if the refinery isn't working. So that's really about the mission critical slash impossible, where Ahlers comes in place.
So in a country as huge as Russia, I'm guessing that there's not a single warehouse where you keep everything. Otherwise, it's impossible to get a part to a location fast. So how does that work?
Yeah, no, exactly. So, I mean, you can easily get to St. Petersburg or to Moscow in Russia. So, usually we have a central stock either in Moscow or in St. Petersburg. But it really depends on the type of business that you're in if additional stocks are needed. So, if you're in the mining business or the oil and gas business, then you might really want to have an additional smaller stock of critical spare parts or of wear parts that you know that will every once in a while need to be replaced. You will want to have them nearby to your customers. To define which parts need to be where, we actually use specific software to calculate this. So we gather all the data that you have, and we put in the historical data on which parts will break down when, and then we calculate based on where your customers are, what is the most, what makes most sense to keep which SKUs where. We do this with our in-house data analytics team, and it really provides an objective picture of what your business needs.
Okay, so you're looking at the history of if the customer has it, the history of when parts break down, and how the cycle time of parts,
Exactly.
how much are used. Okay, and this so the data analytics team comes up with a number of locations, and those are based on the service level that you want and the response time that you want, and
Yeah.
yeah, I can imagine that you would use an intelligent system to determine that, because there are so many choices when it comes to choosing a location.
There are just a lot of variables, and it's not that you can say, okay, for this company, this customer, you need this, and it's the same for everyone. It really depends on the business. It depends on the value of the spare parts. It depends on the cost if something is not working. It doesn't make sense to charter a helicopter, which costs tens of thousands of euros, if the cost of the business not running is, I don't know, 5,000 euros, for example. So all these things have to be taken into consideration. So yeah, it's an interesting business in Russia. It keeps you off the street.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine.
Yeah. But it's not only, I mean, it sounds a bit exotic now, chartering helicopters, etc. It's not something that we do daily, of course. But another, very down-to-earth example, from the IT, from the electronics business, even if you can provide spare parts in time, if you can provide replacements or RMAs in time, you also want to get the broken part. You want to get it back, because you might want to test it. You might want to understand why it actually broke down, or you might even just want to repair it. There is a kind of measurement, especially in the electronics business, dead on arrival.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the part actually broke down. It might just mean that the software that's on the part stopped working. And if you reinstall the software, the part will work again. So here you have to imagine that you have a certain amount of returns in Russia, and you ship them all back to Europe or to the US, and you start analyzing why they broke down. And you understand that in 50% of the cases, the part broke down because the software wasn't working. Now, here's the thing. If you could repair the software in Russia, you would save money on logistics, on all the export and all the transportations
Yeah.
back to the US or to Europe. So that is also something that we as Ahlers are doing, testing and screening. We do level 1 repairs. We can reinstall the software. We can assess it, reinstall the software, and basically save you money on your business in Russia.
Yeah, I can imagine that that a category of products like electronics is also difficult to get in and out of Russia because of its potential uses.
That is a different story indeed. Then we talk about import export of goods in and out of Russia. Um,
But isn't that what you do when you ship broken parts back
yeah,
to
yeah.
Europe? So if you have to get electronics in and out of Russia, it's I guessing it's simpler to then that's what you're doing to keep them there.
I would even say that it's easier to get parts into Russia, although that is also a challenge because you need to get the right certificates. In case of electronics, some certificates might even need to be approved by the FSB, so that's already quite challenging.
Yeah,
However, to get parts out of Russia, you actually need to show the documents by which the specific part was imported. So
yeah,
you really need to show the whole chain of events. And if you cannot show the import declaration of the part that broke down, then you cannot do the export. So besides the fact that it just takes up more money and time, um, it's actually quite difficult to make the export. And that is also one of the reasons why we started doing this as Ahlers, as a European company in Russia, because a lot of companies today, they use local players, they use local distributors, um, whose core business really isn't doing the logistics; it's selling the parts, and that is, the big bottleneck, the big challenge in Russia, but also other CIS countries.
yeah. Essentially, if you have a distributor that distributes your product, you lose control.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, again, it comes back to the strategic choice of doing business. If you're
Hmm.
okay with that, then it's your product, it's your business. But in the end, we all understand that if you buy something and afterwards you receive bad service, then probably you will not buy it again. I mean, you're not going to
Yeah,
buy an iPhone or an expensive Samsung phone if it breaks down after a few months and Apple or Samsung says, okay, well, thank you, but just buy a new one. Everything will be okay.
yeah,
Um, so, what do we understand from this? If your equipment is expensive, cost money, if it's mission critical, if you don't provide service in a qualitative way, then basically it has an impact on your business development in Russia. And
yeah.
then we look at the region. The region is quite a complex one. We talked about the geographical expanse. We talked about getting products actually to the site, but also the import of product, the export of products in Russia is complex. And if you add that all up together, then I think as a European company, as a Belgian company in Russia, with own assets, with own knowledge, that Ahlers has quite an interesting position. And we like to see ourselves as a regional expert, meaning that
Hmm.
we don't provide the service all over the world, but we provide it in Russia and CIS. And that's really where we have own people, own knowledge, own assets, where we don't outsource the critical things of the service.
And that's where your customers take back control over their own service logistics within Russia, which is not possible if they only do it via a distributor. And if I hear you correctly, would also not work as well if they just hire one of the big global logistics service providers.
Well, exactly. I mean, obviously, you always have some level of control, but um, it depends what you want to reach with your control. If you need to manage 3 or 4 or 5 different distributors, then you will never get the same level of quality, the same level of service. Some might be better, some might be worse, some just don't care. Another possibility, and that's quite a popular one, is that, well, most of our target customers, they work with a global service logistics provider, who are a lot bigger than Ahlers, and who basically say, okay, I will provide mission critical logistics, service logistics for you worldwide. Doesn't matter which country, I will find a way.
Yeah.
Very convenient, I agree. You just have one contract and, the company makes it happen all over the world. The point is, those companies don't have their own setup all over the world. They only have it in some regions of the world. Mostly, they don't have their own setup in more complex regions like Russia, where they then use subcontractors. We actually worked for a few of those kinds of companies. And what we saw was that it just takes a lot of time, to get the communication, to get the message from beginning till end. And there a lot of service is actually lost or can be improved. And then we said, okay, we cannot provide it worldwide, but we can provide it in a region which has a lot of potential, which we understand that Western companies want to do business there, and we are a regional expert. So that is why we're really focusing on companies that are saying, okay, for me, Russia, CIS is a strategical region. I want to be in control of how I want to deliver my service in that region. And that is why I want to work with a regional specialist, with a logistics company, as Ahlers.
Johan, you explained really well how this mission critical logistics works, and you made clear what the impact is of logistics on delivering service. Do you have any advice that you can give companies to make sure that they don't end up in Mission Impossible?
Mission Impossible. So I would say the following. Understand where you want to be with your business in Russia from a strategical perspective, and understand how the service that you deliver can impact your sales. And based on that, just make an analysis of what you need to have. And if the outcome is that you need to provide service, you need to be locally active, you need to have parts in the country, then basically there is only one way to do that, is to be locally active. So you then either, again, open your own legal entity, put your own operational people there, start managing logistics yourself, or outsource that to a company like Ahlers, to a 3PL, who not only arranges the logistics, but also manages the whole import process, certification process, and the last mile delivery in Russia. But it's really about having local expertise.
Okay, well, thank you, Johan.
Thank you, Martijn.
Thank you for listening to Does Logistics Matter? For more on trends and innovations in supply chain and logistics, visit our blog at www.logisticsmatter.com. This podcast was produced by Dimitri Vleugel. The music is based on a sample by Ruggerman and produced by Michael Spengler. This episode was sponsored by Ahlers. For more than 110 years, Ahlers has been helping clients all over the world. Active in 3 regions, Europe, CIS and Asia, they provide state-of-the-art logistics and tailor-made solutions. Their services focus on supply chain solutions, warehousing, project and machinery logistics, secure transportation of high-value and/or theft-sensitive goods, trade facilitation and after-sales services, and supply chain data analytics. Ahlers finds the best solutions that fit the customer profile perfectly. They enable customers to stay focused on their core business and manage innovative supply chain solutions which add value. They solve supply chain challenges in complex environments. Find out more at www.ahlers.com. That's AHLERS.